often the process as it unfolds leads to a displacement where low-income people get pushed out and a new community rises up.
Over 400 years ago, Native Americans have lived along the banks of the Anacostia River and parts of what is now Washington, D.C. The Nankinchtank tribe in the early 1600s had about 300 members who lived in villages, mostly along the eastern banks of the Anacostia River. Around the same time, Captain John Smith led an exploration of Europeans and mapped tribes in the area. In 1622, roughly 24 men from Jamestown made an attempt to get corn from the Anacostan tribe. Fighting broke out and the entire group of settlers was wiped out, except for an Englishman named Henry Fleet. By the late 1660s, the Anacostans relocated to what they called Anacostine Island, now Theodore Roosevelt Island, and by the 1700s, the tribe merged with the Piscataways and other tribes to the north because of its small numbers. In an interview with Derek Hyra, associate professor within the Department of Public Administration and Policy at American University, otherwise known as the gentrification expert in Washington, D.C., he explains how the same area within D.C. is experiencing their own type of gentrification today.
Let's take a place like Anacostia right now. Anacostia is 90% African American, but it has already received a tremendous amount of investments. So I would say that Anacostia is experiencing early stage gentrification.
Environmental gentrification is the process in which residents from once low-income neighborhoods are being ousted from their communities in the effort to create greener, more sustainable cities and neighborhoods. The impacts of gentrification not only have significant impacts on environmental health of communities, but the social, cultural, and public health of gentrified communities as well.
The vast majority of communities that go through gentrification in the United States, it is when whites move into a low-income minority community. So, but I guess, so the way I define it doesn't have race, but the way it unfolds in the U.S., it is racialized.
According to the Critical Sustainabilities Project supported by USC and the University of San Francisco, environmental gentrification takes what seems to be good, forward-thinking strategies to make cities more environmentally friendly and ends up pushing residents from their communities where they and their families have lived for decades. Although environmental infrastructure change is much needed in American cities to combat the adverse effects of climate change, the sustainability initiatives introduced by public works departments, developers, and city councils do not always have the community in mind. Because profit is placed over the well-being of community, rent and property value is driven up as large developers come in to revamp the neighborhood for profit. Yes, they are attempting to create sustainable buildings, streets, landscaping, and energy resources, but in turn are negatively affecting rent prices as well as the social culture of the people who live there too. In addition, many cities have little community input into decisions for neighborhoods set to be sustainably redeveloped. However, like many other case studies we've examined in class, community members who have stakes in the culture and property of their neighborhoods are often not listened to, even when they may have a seat at the table. In an article by the American Public Works Association, Washington, D.C. is highlighted as leading many initiatives aimed at making the district's neighborhoods safe, attractive, and sustainable. Cities like D.C. often focus sustainability for infrastructure like roads and waste management facilities. This is because the Department of Public Works has more decision-making power in these fields than they do for the rates of rent, retail, and other property market prices. Therefore, community members are mostly allowed to give input on initiatives like composting, bike lanes, and tree planting. However, although D.C. has passed environmentally conscious acts like the Sustainable Solid Waste Management Amendment Act of 2014 and created pay or save as you throw facilities where people can save money if they produce less garbage, these are the types of initiatives that drive up rent and property value and only benefit those who can afford to live in these areas. So what happens to those who are victims of environmental gentrification? Gentrification is not only an environmental justice issue, but a social justice issue as well. Victims of gentrification are not only losing their homes, they lose their culture, community, and resources. Residents of pre-gentrified areas have developed their own social structure in which they rely on their neighbors and their neighbors rely on them. They depend on what they know and the affordable food, education, and health prices to survive. When a neighborhood begins to gentrify, not only can families lose their homes, but they lose their friends and community who share in their culture, faith, and interests. Even if a family could stretch to adapt to the increase in rent, higher food and transportation costs do not fare well on their wallets. Health becomes a drastic issue with environmental gentrification as well. Members of marginalized communities often bear the brunt of gentrification, and many of these communities are made up of multiple intersectional identities. According to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, children, women, the elderly, the disabled, and people of color in gentrified communities are at a higher risk for cancer, birth defects, and cardiovascular disease. They also suffer from shorter lifespans, greater infant mortality, diabetes, and asthma. This is because there is low accessibility to a once affordable healthy food, clinics, schools, and places to exercise. Crime and violence rates can increase in these areas, and victims of gentrification are often forced into heavily polluted areas with low water and low air quality. Moving forward, we asked Derek Hyra how his research would impact, better, and change the process of what is now gentrification.
So my research agenda is very much related to trying to move the conversation from gentrification, which is associated with displacement, to equitable development, where you could have investments in low-income spaces, but have it done in a way where there's minimal displacement and where long-term low-income people benefit from the resources that come into their community. And so it's really a set of research that tries to think about how can you bring investments into underserved areas, but do it in a way that lifts all boats, that helps improve the life chances of low-income people.
Low-income communities should not be driven out of their homes at the expense of environmental sustainability. These benefits should not only be reaped from wealthy, privileged communities, but should be made accessible and affordable to all.